Well, I think in terms of the it was just a singular monumental achievement. So the first thing that I responded to was the invention of the alphabet itself. But then in terms of the king himself, there seemed to be personality aspects or even organizational talents that were very compelling. He seems to have gotten out of people from the Hall of Worthies, for example. But also, I think I had to respect his obsession, if that's the right way to put it. It seems that the king had a vision of what he wanted to accomplish for his people, and he would not let anything stop him. The reason that I saw him as an artist is that it seems that his creation was as great as a Michelangelo or a Leonardo. He was not just an inventor, he seemed to be a great artist. I felt motivated to retell the story to people like myself who had not heard of it before. But more importantly, or more personally, as a writer, I could not stop thinking about this story. And that happens very rarely. It's almost like a gift when that happens. He seems to have been genuinely compassionate and genuinely generous. And it's hard to find a ruler, especially centuries ago, that. And again, he seems to have had a certain kind of talent set, like a Leonardo da Vinci, but Leonardo was obviously had all kinds of personal demons and so forth. And Sejong doesn't seem to have those. So this is probably an idealization, but he seems a kind of a very perfect ideal of a human being. I think traditionally we think of rulers as giving commands and then everyone obeys because they are essentially forced to obey or expected to obey. But it seems to me that with King Sejong, and again, using the Hall of Worthies as an example, that he surrounded himself with very talented people, and these people were encouraged to do their best because they agreed with the things that he wanted to do, and they personally appreciated the way they were treated, perhaps. In other words, they delivered the best of themselves because they wanted to, not because they were commanded to. I don't know if that's literally true, but that seems to be my impression. For the kind of writing that I like to do, I usually read a lot of books in preparation. I read as much material as I thought was necessary for this story. There are countless books that have been written in English about Asian history. With respect to the Nestorians, the Nestorian Church in China, there are multiple books that have been written. So even though there is historical background for a lot of what I have written, I had to invent a lot of things that I wanted to see. For example, I found that there is a small stone cross in a museum in Seoul. The scholars think might be Nestorian. I think honestly, it is very thin evidence and is not very convincing to someone like a historian. But with a small mention like that, I feel like that is enough for the purposes of fiction. And so that encouraged me to have one scene where King Sejong visits a Nestorian priest who I imagine may be the last Nestorian in all of Asia. He's in China. I thought that the imagery of a cross, for example, would be startling and interesting in 15th century Joseon. And I wanted to illustrate King Sejong's an aspect of his personality that I imagine he is able to talk with and mix with any kind of person. I did manage to find a couple of very good resources in English. They do exist. The primary one for me is called The Korean Language Form of 1446. The author is named Gary Ledyard, and he wrote the first book. It's his PhD thesis, his doctorate thesis from, I believe it's 1961. That scholar argues that it is proper to give King Sejong essentially full credit for the invention of the alphabet. Even though he used the Hall of Worthies to assist him, he assigns primary credit for the invention to King Sejong. That was my primary source for everything mentioned in the annals about Hangul and the development of the alphabet. I think I pretty much said it in the prologue. I understand how important King Sejong is, and in the United States we have a looser relationship with our historical figures and the fictions that we tell about them. And I'm a science fiction writer and a fantasy writer. I'm not a drama writer. So those aspects mean that the novel will probably be more fantastical than the other dramas and other treatments of King Sejong that have been seen on Korean film and TV and novels. I hope I didn't push the boundaries of acceptable storytelling too far, and I hope it is an emotional truth that still can come through and be appreciated. Thank you. Yes, I do. Originally, this story as a 4-hour screenplay and was intended to be produced for an audience, an international audience. And my manager, Saram, they approached Fitbook, and Fitbook asked me to do the novelization. So that was the story of how the novel came to be. But the intention is still to have this produced as television or film. ASAP. That's a joke. I must find the right partners, and it will be a long process, I'm sure, as it always is. Thank you very much, Mr. Lee. Yes, one of the things that I've always followed and about is mythology. So I'm interested. My next story that I tell as a novel will be based in Korean mythology. I particularly like the hete that you see everywhere. So I think I'm going to do a story based on that.